I just got home. From the woods. Cliché, I know. But I need to write down what just happened while it's still fresh in my head. And I need to call the cops. Or anybody. But I'm not sure they'll believe me. I was at my friend Matt's house this afternoon. 4 of us just hanging out. We're all big on urban exploration or haunted places. Even though we know it's bullshit, but it's still fun to scare ourselves. I admit, sometimes I chicken out because I just get a bad feeling, which can result in some piss taking. It was me, Dave, Graham, and Matt. I had my car. Dave suggested we drive out to the woods to explore the cabin that had been abandoned some 20 years ago. No scary stories behind it. The guy who lived in there died in the hospital and it sat empty since then. We were bored, so thought why not. We'd never been to this place before. It was around a 40-minute drive. According to online forums, it was fenced off around a 100 feet perimeter for some reason that nobody could fathom, and you had to climb the fence since there were no break-ins and we didn't have wire cutters. Photos of it looked unremarkable, just some furniture lying, rotten floors and walls, and graffitis, etc. We headed off, me driving. Following the instructions online, we got to the woods. The road took us further in and obviously it got a little darker, but it was still a bright afternoon. The trees were bare, soggy leaves still on the ground. We reached the coordinates of where the cabin should be, and I stopped the car. I hadn't really been feeling great about this on the drive out, so I told the guys to go explore and I'd sit in the car waiting for them. Of course I got the usual insults about my feelings, but it was all good-natured. They said they wouldn't be long, and headed toward the fence to climb. I couldn't see the fence from my car, as it was over a slight rise. Graham is, bigger guy, so the climbing for him was a bit tougher, but he got there. The guys disappeared over the hill and I started looking up crap on my phone with the radio on. Around 20 minutes passed, and I thought I heard something, like a bird squawking. I turned the radio off and listened. A few seconds passed, then again a shriek, although this time it didn't sound like a bird. I put the window down. I heard Matt's voice shouting, "Go! Run! Get the fuck out of here!" Then a blood-curdling scream. I thought it was a joke and tried to stay calm, but then Graham appeared from over the rise, running like I've never seen him run before, and crying. He fell over a couple of times. I would have thought it was a joke, other than the look of sheer terror on his face. I got out of the car and went to the fence. He reached the fence and frantically started climbing, screaming as he was. I was also screaming, "What the fuck? What's happening?" In his panic, he lost his footing and fell. I looked towards the rise, walking slowly. What can only be described as a black shadow person right towards us. Graham got back on his feet and started climbing again while the thing slowly got closer. I was desperately trying to rip the fence open with my bare hands, but nothing. Graham fell off again. He got up, started shaking the fence, screaming at me to help him. The thing was maybe 20 feet away from him and getting closer. We both looked at each other, fighting for ways to get him out of there. My hands were bleeding from trying to rip the fucking fence down. He was sobbing, as was I. As the thing got closer, I could hear the crunching of his footsteps on the leaves. Graham was still struggling to climb the fence. I knew he wasn't going to make it. In a state of hysteria and terror, I ran into the car and started the engine. The last thing I saw was this fucking thing reach out to Graham's neck while he was still trying to break through the fence. I'm home now. I drove home in a state of shock, and I can only assume my friends are dead. I don't know what to do or who to call. How the fuck do I explain this? Do I go back to the cabin to try and find them? I shouldn't have left them. My younger brother Jerry is an amateur filmmaker, and he has tried to make many films and gain funding, but he had always failed. If I had to be honest, Jerry isn't a very good filmmaker, and he has tried making money through filming weddings and other special occasions, but he absolutely hated it. Then, 2 years ago, Jerry stopped trying to make films, and he always goes down to the forest where an abandoned cabin is always present, and he just films and records the inside of the cabin. The cabin, like I said, being abandoned for so many years, it is pretty much a dirty, trashed, and forgotten place. Why my brother is obsessed with just recording the inside of the cabin was beyond me at the time. I mean, for 2 years, my brother has had no real job, and hasn't really paid anything towards household bills, and when we tell him off for it, and all my younger brother says is, "One day, my camera will record what's inside the cabin." I looked through his film camera, and it only has recordings of what's inside the cabin, which is just a crap hole, really, and nothing really interesting. I do tell Jerry to get his act together and find a proper job and to start being responsible, because he can't just record the insides of a trashed abandoned cabin all his life. I didn't know why he was so obsessed with the cabin until one day I decided to visit the cabin in the forest myself, and I saw my brother's filming equipment all set and it was recording. I looked at the camera and it was recording the insides of the cabin. I was going to switch it off until on the camera I saw a dancing man. When I looked at the cabin, but not through the camera, but my eyes, nothing was there. I looked through the camera recording again, and there was that man in old-time World War II clothing, dancing on his own, but nothing else was in the cabin except me and this camera. When my younger brother came back, he saw my shock, and when he stopped the recording, he played it back to me, and there should have been that dancing man, but he wasn't in the recording anymore. It's like he had disappeared from the recording. I finally now knew what my brother meant when he said one day my camera will record what's inside the cabin. That day, we recorded all sorts of things which wasn't in front of us, but when we both checked looking through the recordings, they never showed up. My younger brother is obsessed with this, and even I wanted to catch some recordings of the paranormal shit that goes inside this cabin. My younger brother practically records nothing. We once recorded a woman crying in this cabin, but when I looked away from the camera and with my own eyes, I couldn't see anything inside this place except me, my brother, and this camera. But through this camera, she was present. To now my annoyance, as well, when I played it back, the crying woman was not on the recording anymore. I supported my younger brother now, and I too was determined to one day record the paranormal within this cabin. The cabin never felt too cold when the camera started recording. Something which isn't there, and we had to figure out how to trap the images within the recordings. This camera can record anything else perfectly fine, it's just those things, whatever they are, they never stay in the recording. When they are being recorded, they are not inside the cabin with us. One day, the camera recorded a man murdering another man inside the cabin, and both me and my camera fixated to the video screen in this camera. The murderer got in through the back door of the cabin. To our joy, finally we had caught something more grotesque, and the murderer got out. We were even more overjoyed when we looked through the recording and it showed everything this time. And finally we were successful, but when we looked away from the camera, it wasn't anything supernatural, but it was real, and both me and my brother had just watched and recorded a man murdering another man. We stopped that day going into that cabin. There's a particular eeriness to the woods, one that can't easily be explained. That didn't bother me when I set out on another afternoon dirt bike ride. It was nearing sunset when I decided to go ride up the mountain and watch the sky turn wonderful shades of pink and orange as the sun set. As I packed up some food, water, flashlight, stuffed it all in my bag, and made my way out into the garage. I made sure the gas tank was full and checked the oil and started the bike up. After letting it warm up for a couple minutes, I shifted into first and started heading up the trail. About halfway up the mountain is a small clearing in the middle of the trail. I always assumed the clearing was made by campers and made my way on past the clearing and up to the top. When I finally got there, I turned off the bike, put the kickstand down, and was surprised to see the sky wasn't the typical orange and pink. Instead, it was a mix of dark gray clouds. I had checked the forecast earlier and there was a 0% chance of rain today, so this was rather odd. The sun had already set too. I had never been late to watch the sunset from the mountaintop before, and just figured I was having an off day. I ate some snacks and drank a little bit of water before deciding it was time to head back before it got dark. I started up the bike and turned around to go back down the mountain. I was almost to the clearing when I noticed something odd. The woods. They were completely silent. There's always constant noise from frogs, crickets, birds, and anything else moving through woods, but this wasn't normal. The next thing I noticed, there was no wind. There was always a constant gust of wind blowing over the mountain until that moment. I started feeling a little uneasy and made my way down the trail. I was almost into the clearing when the bike suddenly shut off. I was still a few miles away from home, so it wouldn't be an easy walk if something broke. I hopped off the bike and checked the engine, choke, clutch, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then I checked the gas tank. The gas tank was completely empty. I could have sworn I filled it up before I left. One tank was more than enough to get me up the mountain and down a couple of times. The eerie silence of the woods was really creeping me out now. The woods were never this quiet, ever. That's why I noticed someone standing at the edge of the clearing. It looked like one of my neighbors from where I was standing. So I started heading towards them. I hadn't heard anyone else ride up the mountain, especially when it was starting to get dark. I made my way across the clearing, but when I got about halfway across the clearing, I knew something wasn't right. His joints. His joints were bent at impossible angles, and he had his back to me. I slowed a bit, but still kept moving forward. That's when he turned and looked at me. But it wasn't a normal fluid motion. It was one jerky motion, as if he didn't know how to turn around. I stopped walking and just stared at him. Maybe he needed help. Then I saw his face. He had an insanely large smile, one that was not humanly possible. This is when I started running back to the bike. I left my phone in my backpack, back where I left the bike. I quickly sprinted back to the bike, grabbed my pack, and ripped my phone out. I tried to call my parents down at the house, but I didn't have any signal. I jammed the phone down in my pocket and looked back at what I thought was my neighbor. He was about 50 feet closer. He was walking in extremely jerky motions towards me, smiling the entire time. I booked it down into the woods beside the trail so I could try and go around him, and then get back on the trail and follow it back down home. It didn't take long to get around him because he was moving so slowly. I ran for about a mile before I couldn't run anymore. My legs were sore and I still had around 2 miles to go. It was getting pretty dark at this point, so I took the flashlight out of my pack and kept walking home. I figured I was far enough away from him that I could walk the rest of the way home before he could catch up. Then I heard a twig snap. I whipped around and shined my light on the trail behind me. That's when my heart stopped. He was only a couple 100 feet behind me, moving much faster. I turned back around and non-stop sprinted back to the house. I could never normally run that far, but fear is a good motivator. When I finally got back home, no one was home and all the lights were off. I quickly got inside and locked the door behind me. I went over to the landline phone to see if I could call my parents, but the line was dead. I've tried calling them with my phone 5 times now with no answer. I've been rapidly typing this up on my phone in case something happens to me. I've always been checking the windows for any sign of him out in the yard, but I didn't see anything. Maybe I was just hallucinating, but I'm not in any meds. Now he's standing there, looking directly at me. His head is tilted at an ungodly angle. I just tried calling the police and no one answered. What is going on? My only other option is to go to my neighbor's and see if his wife is there. I just looked out the window and he's gone. I don't know where he went. I'm terrified to leave the house. I'm hiding out in my room right now. I'm gonna call my neighbor. Maybe that wasn't actually him. He answered. He didn't say anything. It was all garbled noise. I just heard something crash downstairs. I'm crawling beneath the bed. I hope he didn't find a way inside. I'm so scared. Somebody help me. I must have passed out from fear last night because I woke up with the sun shining outside. I slowly made my way around the house and the place is a wreck. I called my neighbor's house again and this time his wife picked up. She said he was acting strange and went for a walk yesterday but never came back. He's reported missing now. My parents still haven't answered my calls and I don't know what happened to them. I reported them as missing this morning and the police seem baffled. I hope they turn up alright. The phones and everything seem to be working perfectly now. I may never know what actually happened yesterday. Maybe my neighbor was actually trying to help me. He was always nice like that. He would lend me tools to work on my dirt bike all the time. I just heard a crash in the attic. I hope that's him. He was always helpful, always kind. And his blood-stained smile is so silly.